The waters of the Platte River ran murky that autumn morning, carrying golden leaves that danced like ghosts of the past. Aiyana walked along the bank with hesitant steps, her moccasins sinking into the damp earth while the icy wind of the plains cut her face like invisible blades. 3 moons had passed since she left the Cheyenne village, banished by the furious words of the tribal council and the looks of contempt that followed her like persistent shadows.
The French trader who had once whispered promises in her ear had departed with the winter caravans, leaving only the echo of his betrayal and the life growing silently in her womb. The distant smoke from her tribe's lodges rose to the sky like unanswered prayers, a sight that made her heart bleed more than any physical wound. Aiyana pressed her hands against her still subtle abdomen, feeling the presence of the child she carried like a secret too heavy to bear alone. The other women of the tribe had always envied her beauty, hair black as a moonless night, dark eyes that shone like stars, and a natural grace that made young warriors compete for her attention. Now that same beauty seemed like a curse that had condemned her to exile and shame. Buffalo grazed peacefully in the distant plain, their majestic silhouettes outlined against the infinite horizon that had once been her home. Aiyana remembered when she ran free across these lands, gathering roots with her mother, and listening to ancient stories told by elders around the sacred fire. Those days seemed to belong to another life, to a version of herself that had died the moment she chose to follow her heart instead of her people's customs. Regret consumed her like a slow fire, not for the love she had felt, but for the pain she had brought to those she loved most. Takoda watched from afar, hidden among the willows that lined the river, his heart breaking at the sight of the woman he had secretly loved since childhood. He had been chosen by the Great Spirit to be a warrior, his hands skilled with the bow and his courage recognized in battle, but nothing had prepared him for the war he fought within himself. When Aiyana was banished, he had remained silent in the council, his words trapped in his throat by the weight of tradition and the fear of challenging the elders. Now, seeing her alone and vulnerable, guilt devoured him like hungry wolves. The decision took shape in his chest like a storm forming on the horizon. He would not allow her to face the winter alone, even if it cost him his own position in the tribe. Takoda emerged from the willows with determined steps, his eagle feather headdress swaying gently in the wind, and for the first time in months, Aiyana was not completely alone on the vast plains that had witnessed both her downfall and the awakening of a love that would challenge all the conventions of their world. The encounter happened in silence, like 2 rivers joining in an inevitable confluence. Aiyana raised her misty eyes as she saw Takoda approach, and for a moment, time seemed suspended between them like morning mist over the waters. He carried a leather pack filled with provisions, pemmican, medicinal herbs, and a buffalo robe that still held the warmth of his own lodge. His dark eyes carried no judgment, only a deep compassion that made Aiyana's heart race in a way she thought she had forgotten. Without a word, he extended the robe, wrapping her trembling shoulders with the gentleness of one touching a wounded flower. Takoda's presence brought memories that Aiyana had buried deeply. Childhood games among the lodges, shy glances during sacred ceremonies, and the sense of safety he had always radiated like the warmth of a fire. She remembered how he defended her from other boys when they were children, how his eyes lit up when she laughed, and how he always found excuses to be near when she worked with the other women. Now, with the maturity brought by pain, Aiyana finally understood that the love she had sought in foreign arms had always been beside her, silent and constant, like the stars that guided nomads across the plains. Takoda led her to a hidden cave among the red rocks, a refuge he had discovered during his solitary hunts and now offered as sanctuary. He lit a small fire with the skill of one born to survive in the wilderness, and the dancing flames created welcoming shadows on the stone walls. Aiyana watched his precise and careful movements, noticing how each gesture carried a protective intention, as if he were building not just a shelter, but a new world where she could exist without shame. Gratitude overwhelmed her, more than any reproach ever had. The hours passed in a silent intimacy that spoke louder than 1,000 words. Takoda prepared willow bark tea to ease Aiyana's pregnancy nausea, his strong and calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he served the warm drink. She drank slowly, feeling not just the liquid warming her body, but also hope being reborn in her chest, like the first spring flowers breaking through snow. For the first time since banishment, Aiyana didn't feel like an outcast, but like a woman worthy of care and protection. When night fell over the plains like a star-embroidered cloak, Takoda positioned himself at the cave entrance like a silent guardian. Aiyana lay down on the soft furs he had arranged, feeling the baby move gently in her womb, as if it too recognized the safety of the moment. She closed her eyes, knowing that for the first time in months they would sleep without fear of wolves or cutting cold, protected by a man who had risked his own tribal position to be by her side. The sound of Takoda's steady breathing mixed with the night wind, creating a symphony of protection that lulled her dreams. Dawn brought with it a reality that could not be ignored forever. Black smoke rose on the distant horizon, and Takoda immediately recognized the signs. The tribe's scouts had found them. He watched Aiyana awaken slowly. Her hair spread over the buffalo hide like dark rivers, and for a moment he wished he could stop time and keep her safe in that refuge forever. But the distant drumming of horse hooves echoed through the rocks, bringing with it the inexorable weight of consequences. Takoda gently touched Aiyana's shoulder, his fingers transmitting a silent strength that she absorbed like dry earth absorbs rain. The approaching group of warriors was led by Mapi, Takoda's older brother, and one of the most respected men in the tribe. His war paint gleamed under the morning sun like symbols of unquestionable authority, and his eyes carried the hardness of one who had been sent to fulfill an unpleasant but necessary mission. Beside him rode 4 other warriors, all men Takoda had known since childhood, but who now looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and incomprehension. The tension in the air was palpable like the heat that precedes a storm, and everyone knew that this encounter would change lives forever. Aiyana emerged from the cave with the dignity of a deposed queen, her pregnancy still discreet but perceptible to trained eyes. She did not lower her gaze before the warriors, choosing to face her condemnation with the courage that had always defined her spirit. Mape dismounted from his horse with deliberate movements, each step echoing like a sentence being pronounced. His words, when they finally came, cut through the morning air like certain arrows. Takoda had dishonored not only himself, but his entire lineage by protecting a banished woman. And now both would face the judgment of the tribal council. Takoda stepped forward, positioning himself between Aiyana and the warriors, with the determination of a bison protecting its herd. His words were few, but loaded with a conviction that made even Mape hesitate. He took full responsibility for his actions and was prepared to face any consequence. But he would not allow Aiyana to be mistreated or humiliated. The plains wind carried his words like seeds that would find fertile soil in the hearts of those who still remembered what it meant to honor true love above fear and tradition. The journey back to the village was a silent procession that stretched across the plains like an open wound. Aiyana rode among the warriors with the grace of one who had learned to carry pain like a second skin, while Takoda kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, already visualizing the moment when he would have to choose between the safety of his social position and the protection of the woman he had finally recognized as his destiny. Eagles flew high above them, their wings spread against the infinite sky, silent witnesses to a love that would challenge the very foundations upon which their society had been built. The Cheyenne village stretched along the valley like a living organism, its leather lodges arranged in circles that reflected the ancestral order of their people. Fires smoldered lazily in the cold morning, and the women preparing morning meals stopped their activities to observe the group's arrival. Their gazes followed Aiyana with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval, whispers running among them like wind through dry grass. Children stopped their games to peek from behind their mothers' skirts, their innocent eyes not yet fully understanding the gravity of the situation, but sensing the tension that hung in the air like thick smoke. The ceremonial drum began to sound, its deep beats echoing through the valley like the heart of the earth itself. Elders emerged from their lodges with the solemnity reserved for the most critical moments of tribal life, their time-marked faces carrying the wisdom and weight of countless difficult decisions. Wombliska, the principal chief, walked with measured steps, his presence commanding respect even in silence, His graying hair was braided with sacred feathers, and his deep eyes seemed capable of seeing through appearances to the true essence of things. Takoda helped Aiyana dismount, his fingers briefly intertwining with hers in a gesture of support that did not go unnoticed by the observers. She felt the child move in her womb, as if it too recognized the importance of that moment, and placed her hand protectively over her abdomen. The courage that had sustained her during banishment and the journey back now wavered before the reality of facing the entire assembled tribe. But Takoda's firm presence beside her reminded her that she was no longer alone in that battle. The council circle formed naturally, warriors and elders taking their places according to the sacred hierarchy that governed all aspects of Cheyenne life. Wambliska took his central position, his hands resting on the ceremonial staff that symbolized his authority. The silence that followed was charged with expectation, like the moment of quiet before thunder. Everyone knew that the decisions made in that circle would affect not only Aiyana and Takoda, but would echo through future generations like stones thrown into calm waters. Mapi stepped forward to report the events, his voice carrying the weight of fraternal obligation to denounce his own brother's actions. His words painted a clear picture of Takoda's disobedience to tribal laws, but also revealed, involuntarily, the depth of his sacrifice. Aiyana watched the internal conflict that unfolded on Mapi's face. Tribal duty fighting against fraternal love, tradition confronting the understanding that perhaps, just perhaps, his younger brother had found something worth more than social approval. The wind blew through the circle, carrying the aroma of burning sage and the weight of a decision that would change everything. Wambliska rose slowly, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over the sacred circle. His eyes swept across each face present, reading the emotions that hid behind masks of tribal composure. When he finally rested his gaze upon Aiyana, she saw in him not just the authority of a chief, but the complexity of a man who had faced similar dilemmas in his own journey. The child in her womb seemed to recognize the importance of the moment, moving restlessly, as if it too awaited the verdict that would determine its future before it was even born. The chief's words flowed like an ancient river, carrying the wisdom of past generations. He spoke of the laws that kept the tribe united, of the dangers of abandoning the traditions that protected them from the devastating winds of change. But his words also carried a deep understanding of human nature, recognizing that the heart sometimes follows paths that the mind cannot comprehend. Aiyana felt tears burn her eyes, not from shame, but from a strange gratitude for being seen as a complete human being with all the complexities that implied. Takoda remained motionless like a rock against which waves break, but his determination radiated through every fiber of his being. When his turn came to speak, his words were chosen with the care of a craftsman selecting pearls for a sacred necklace. He did not deny having broken tribal laws, nor did he try to justify his actions with empty excuses. Instead, he spoke of true honor, not the honor that comes from blind conformity, but that which is born from the courage to protect the defenseless, even when it means sacrificing everything one possesses. The elders exchanged meaningful glances, their faces expressing the internal struggle between preserving the established order and recognizing that sometimes true leadership requires the courage to question the very foundations upon which society stands. Aiyana watched every nuance of their expressions, trying to decipher the signs that would determine whether she would raise her child as a pariah forever or if there would be a chance for redemption. The wind changed direction, bringing with it the scent of distant rain and the promise of transformation. Wambliska raised his hand, and the silence deepened until only the crackling of fires could be heard. His next words would fall like seeds on prepared soil, some blooming into understanding, others dying in the barren ground of entrenched prejudice. He looked directly at Takoda, recognizing in him not just a warrior who had disobeyed orders, but a man who had the moral courage to place love above fear. The decision he was about to make would echo through generations, transforming not only two lives, but potentially the very nature of compassion within their tribe. Aiyana dentro de sua tribu. Wambliska's word fell upon the circle like the first ray of sun breaking through storm clouds. Takoda would be subjected to the test of the lone warrior, an ancestral trial where a man must survive alone in the wilderness for a full moon, facing not only the dangers of nature, but also the demons of his own soul. If he returned alive and with proof of his courage, his protection of Aiyana would be considered an act of genuine honor, not weakness or rebellion. The silence that followed was dense as morning mist, each person present absorbing the implications of a decision that balanced justice and mercy on a delicate scale. Aiyana felt her heart break at the same time it filled with hope as fragile as ice in spring. The test that Takoda would face was known to break more experienced men, and many who departed for the wilderness never returned to tell their stories. But she also knew the strength of spirit that dwelled in that man, the determination that made him face enraged buffalo without hesitation, and the loyalty that had led him to challenge the entire social structure of his people. Her eyes met his across the circle, and in that silent moment, they exchanged promises that no words could adequately express. Preparations began immediately, for the moon was already growing in the sky, and time was a relentless enemy. Takoda would be sent to the Black Hills, where the spirits of ancestors walked among the pines, and where every shadow could hide both enlightenment and death. He would carry only his basic weapons, minimal clothing, and a small amount of water, enough not to make the trial impossible, but not enough to guarantee comfort or safety. Mapi watched the preparations with a tortured expression, torn between the duty to support the tribal decision and the terror of losing his brother to the cruel mountains. Aiyana would remain in the village during Takoda's absence, but under a kind of protective custody that kept her separate from normal tribal life. A lodge was erected on the periphery of the camp, far enough to mark her difference, but close enough that she could receive basic care during her pregnancy. The older women, some of whom had known her mother, discreetly brought medicinal herbs and nutritious foods, their silent gestures revealing that compassion still existed even when social approval was denied. When the moment of departure came, Takoda approached Aiyana's lodge one last time. He could not touch her before everyone, but his eyes transmitted all the love and determination that words could never express. Aiyana placed her hand over her belly, where the child grew, and made an almost imperceptible gesture that he understood perfectly. She would be waiting, no matter how long it took. The mountains would swallow him like a giant mouth, but she would keep the flame of hope burning until he returned victorious, or until she knew, with absolute certainty, that he had found his destiny among the snowy peaks and ancestral spirits. The Black Hills received Takoda with the deadly silence that precedes great trials. Centuries-old pines rose like ancestral warriors, their crowns lost in the mist that danced between the rocky peaks. The air was thin and cutting, each breath a reminder that he had entered a realm where nature offered no mercy to the weak or indecisive. His feet found animal trails that serpentined through the dense forest, and he followed these ancient paths with the reverence of one who understands that he was walking on sacred lands where every stone carried the memory of his people. The first days tested his physical endurance in ways that no war training had prepared him for. Hunger bit at his stomach like wolf teeth, forcing him to hunt with deadly precision or face the weakness that could cost his life. He tracked a deer across the rocky slopes, his senses sharpened by necessity until he could distinguish every sound of the forest, the rustle of leaves that revealed the prey's presence, the distant echo of its breathing, the exact moment when the animal would lower its guard to drink from the crystalline spring. The arrow flew true, and when the deer fell, Takoda offered a prayer of gratitude that echoed among the pines like an ancestral song. But the true battle was not against hunger or cold, but against the demons that inhabited his own mind. In the lonely nights, when only the stars witnessed his struggle, Takoda faced questions that cut deeper than any blade. Had he chosen the right path in protecting Aiyana, or had he merely followed the selfish impulse of a passionate heart? Did his determination to challenge tribal traditions come from superior wisdom, or from the arrogance of a young man who thought he knew more than the elders? The answers came in fragments, carried by the night wind and the disturbing dreams that visited his restless sleep. In the distant village, Aiyana measured the days by the moon's position and the subtle changes in her own body. The child grew strong in her womb, its movements becoming more defined as if it too eagerly awaited the return of the man who had chosen to protect them. The tribe's women watched her with growing curiosity, some beginning to see in her not just a transgressor, but a woman who carried new life with a dignity that commanded reluctant respect. She worked in silence, sewing small clothes with soft leather scraps, each stitch a silent prayer for Takoda's safety. A snowstorm descended upon the mountains like the wrath of spirits, testing Takoda's resolve in ways he had not anticipated. He built a primitive shelter among the rocks, using pine branches and his own blanket to create a barrier against the cutting wind that howled like hungry wolves. For 3 days and 3 nights, he remained trapped in that tiny space, surviving on handfuls of melted snow and strips of dried meat, his mind wandering between memories of Aiyana and visions of the future they hoped to build together. When the storm finally passed, leaving the world covered by an immaculate white cloak, Takoda emerged from his refuge transformed, no longer a young warrior questioning his choices, but a man who had found his truth in the depths of isolation and the struggle for survival. The moon completed its cycle when a solitary figure emerged from the Black Hills, walking with the unwavering determination of one who had faced his deepest fears and emerged victorious. Takoda carried with him not only the physical proof of his survival, skins of animals he had hunted, tools he had created with his own hands, scars that told stories of battles against the wilderness, but also an inner wisdom that radiated from his eyes like sacred flames. His beard had grown, his muscles were more defined by constant struggle, and his bearing carried the silent authority of someone who had looked death in the eyes and chosen to live. The entire village gathered to witness his return, for news of his approach had spread like fire through dry grass. Wambliska waited in the center of the ceremonial circle, his eyes studying every detail of the transformation that the mountains had wrought in the young warrior. When Takoda placed the evidence of his ordeal at the chief's feet, bare claws from a mortal combat he had faced, eagle feathers he had collected from impossible nests, medicinal roots that grew only on the highest peaks, a murmur of respectful admiration ran through the assembled crowd. He had not merely survived, but thrived where others would have perished. Aiyana emerged from her peripheral lodge like the sun rising after a long night, her pregnancy now evident to all eyes, but carried with a dignity that transformed her condition from a source of shame into a symbol of future hope. Her steps were measured, each movement a silent declaration that she had waited with the patience of one who trusts in the strength of true love. When her eyes met Takoda's across the circle of spectators, the world seemed to stop for an infinite moment. There were no more doubts, fears, or hesitations, only the absolute certainty of two hearts that had found their destiny in each other. The ceremony that followed was unlike any other in Cheyenne tribal history. Wambliska spoke of courage that transcends conformity, of love that defies conventions, but still honors the essential values that keep a people united. He acknowledged that Takoda had proven that protecting the vulnerable was not a sign of weakness, but the highest expression of masculine strength. Aiyana was officially readmitted to the tribe, not as a pardoned transgressor, but as a woman who had borne her consequences with dignity and now deserved respect for her endurance. When Takoda could finally touch Aiyana again, his hands found not only the woman he loved, but also the child growing between them, a new life that symbolized not the mistake of the past, but the promise of the future. They married under the stars that had witnessed their entire journey, their hands united, while the entire tribe celebrated around fires that danced like flames of renewed hope. The child would be born a few months later, strong and healthy, carrying in its eyes the ancestral wisdom and courage of parents who had proven that true love not only survives life's storms, but emerges from them stronger and more beautiful. Their stories would be told around fires for future generations, reminding all that sometimes the greatest act of honor is having the courage to redefine what honor truly means. If you like this story, leave a like and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next stories.